Not to think I can't make this film because I haven't seen it before, but to precisely do that. Make the story because you haven't seen it. Hi friends, how are you? Today's video is going to be a coffee chat, even though I don't have coffee with me, but which means that I'm not going to put any insert in this video. You can treat this video like a visual podcast and then listening while you're doing chores, so we can have a little chat. Today's video is about how do we find our unique writing voice. I think there are a lot of different reasons that we want to be a writer, but one of the reasons is probably a reason that we all share, is that as an audience or a reader, when we watch movie, read books, we tap into the story world, experience a world and the characters that we might never met in our real life, something we never experienced before, but somehow we can see ourselves in them and then we can experience their emotion. Becoming a storyteller, what we want to do is to also give our reader and the audience the same experience so they can grow and learn and then feeling all the emotions with us. But how can we find the unique voice that we can stand out at the same time it's relatable? So in today's video, I want to share some of my takes on Mira and Nair's Masterclass. She is an Indian American filmmaker without any fictional filmmaking training. Her feature debut was already won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film because of its uniqueness to both Indian audience as well as audience in North America. So she shared 4 tips on how to find your unique voice, and at the end of the video I will pose several questions for you. In that way you can do some journaling on those questions to kind of get it going to find your unique voice. So the things that she shared, I'm going to read my notes here if you don't mind, so I can quote her properly. But number 1, what she shared is to preserve your distinctiveness. This is what she said: be unafraid. You are not foreigner to yourself. Your roots are strong. Do not diffuse them. Go into them and learn the craft of storytelling. Don't be afraid to put yourself and your work, your culture, and your language, and your people in the forefront of the craft. And then she also shared a little bit about her experience move to America and how she tried to remind herself about her roots, and then to be brave, unafraid to make a story about her culture instead of trying to melt into the pot, to fit into the American society. I relate to this a lot because I too moved to the US, but I grew up in China, and especially I grew up in a very small town in the southwest. In China, I'm also counted as minority. In my hometown, we have our own language, our own art, our own festivals, things like that. So my culture is a little bit different than majority of Chinese. It's really easy to forget where I came from, what's my roots when I stay here in the West for such a long, extensive period of time. I find myself start forgetting my own culture, especially things in Chinese while calling my parents. I have a hard time to find a certain phrase to describe how I feel or what I'm thinking. That terrifies me. So I start making a point of revisiting my culture, and then the current story that I'm writing is actually filled with the things that I grew up with. And to my surprise, every time when I develop or start writing the things from that part of the world that I grew up, that I'm very familiar with, those characters are so vivid in my mind that I know how they talk, how they speak, how they felt, and I have so many details to fill in every single scene. It's almost come natural to me, and I think that's what she meant by find your own distinctiveness and find your roots, and then that's what you know, and make what you know. Of course, your life journey is still going, so we can still build more life experience, and it will be very interesting if you can mix with what you knew, what you grew up with what your environment is now, and that can make whatever you're expressing or how you express it very unique. And then the second thing she shared is to find your craft your own way. So like I mentioned a little bit before, she never had a formal training of fictional filmmaking. She was trained as a documentary filmmaker. But if you've experienced about different kind of filmmaking, you will know it's a completely different language, different craft. So what she shared here is, it was in the editing room I learned the story craft. I realized I want to have more control compared to her documentary filmmaking, that she want to have the control of the scene, the line, how the story goes. That's where she started learning to how to make a fictional film. And then she also said something I think is very important, is to arm yourself with craft. I love when people calling storytelling as a craft, because even though storytelling is not as tangible as painting or sculpturing, things like that, but the process is the same. It's a kind of craft that we need to go into the detail. We need to also step out, see the whole picture. It's the kind of thing that we need to constantly practice until we're familiar with the medium, the language, and then that's when we can use it to speak for our emotion. So we have to get our hands dirty to get in there, to make it, to learn and experiment it. And then that's the only way that we can get familiar with the language that's so familiar that we can use it easily in our own way. And her next tip, it's getting better and better. I feel very resonate with this one, is don't worry about finding an audience. So her very first feature film is an Indian film that speaks Indian language. And according to what she shared at that time, I think it was 1988, there was rarely have any Indian film that's in the theater in America. She was a filmmaker in America, and then she wasn't sure if the film will appeal to America audience because it's speaking foreign language and it's a story about a bunch of kids in India, Mumbai. And at the same time, the film is not scripted in a way that having the dialogue that very dramatic, like most of the Indian film at that time. It's a film that kind of gives you a sense of documentary feeling. Even though it's a fictional film, all those kids she used in the film, they are not professional actors. So it's also not the kind of film that's proven appealing to Indian audience. So she said, when I made my first film, if I thought about audiences, I would never made that film. I'm attracted to stories that are about extraordinaries of ordinary life. The best film are those that balance the opposites, revealing tenderness in brutality, the unexpected in the familiar, and the extraordinary in the ordinary. When you're making a story, you plumb the story with as much humor, emotion, rigor, the unseen. Ultimately, you make a good story. When you make a good story, it can reach audience. This is probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned when I'm making my first feature film. To be honest, even the film is released and we went to a lot of festivals, there are part of the result of the film was not to my please. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. I remember back then when I'm making the film, I was struggling. Half of me want to make what I love, and I did wrote a script. have a lot of things in there. That's what I care about, what I know. But during the filmmaking process, I start shifting and agreeing with certain opinions of that I need to also think about the market, think about what audience would like to see. I remember I was taught to even journaling, looking into my target audience and then see what they like, and then kind of guiding my story towards that direction. And I did made certain changes to fit into that, especially from the filmmaking standpoint, like how I shot, edited the whole film. Some of the decisions that I made to today, when I'm watching the film, I feel a sense of very uncomfortableness inside of me, that when I'm watching the film, when I see those choices, I felt I betrayed myself, and it felt inauthentic in a way. I think that's a good lesson to learn. It's not to say to not taking any feedback from other people. I've taken very good feedback from people that I'm happy, very happy about the result. To give you an example, if you already seen my film, if you haven't seen my film, it's in the description down below. You can watch it in a lot of platforms. Anyway, so if you have seen my film, towards the end of the story, there is a scene that's filmed at a bus stop. That's probably one of my favorite scenes in the film. It's a scene that concludes the theme of the story in a very subtle way. That scene didn't exist in the past. I rewrote that scene after my film almost locked the picture. The original scene was horrible. That was completely deleted. It was a feedback coming from my screenwriting instructor, and he watched the film and he told me he loved the film, but what's up with that scene? That scene doesn't feel like something I wrote. I agree immediately, because I always felt that scene is a little bit off, and I went back trying to figure out what I can do with that part. How can I reveal the transformation, the scene, the revelation of the character? And then that's when I came up the bus stop scene, and then now it's one of my favorite scenes. Anyway, I think I'm go off the track a little bit, but what I'm trying to say is we can still take in feedbacks from people for the craft, but don't make a story for the potential audience that we think they will like, because in a way we're kind of manipulating how other people would feel about certain materials, and then that's not true to what we know, how we felt, and then that might not be authentic. Just like what I mentioned before, decisions that I made for the audience are things I don't like about my film because they don't feel authentic. I hope that makes sense. So her last advice is to pursue film only you can make. She shared a little bit about her experience of after she won the Oscars, a lot of people start approaching her to making other films. When she gets an offer, she always asks herself the same questions. Can anyone else make this film, or am I really put on this earth to make it? If anyone else I can think of can make it, it should be made by another person. If there's a point of view or a way in that I think only I have, or I can bring something special to it, then I will make it. I think this is very encouraging for me, because the story that I'm working on right now, half of it, like I mentioned before, is happening at my hometown, the place that I'm familiar with, very, very familiar with, and another half is in the US. I basically split myself into half and put these two different parts of me into both main characters. I really believe that if anyone take the story idea to write the story and make a film, it's not going to be the same as what I would do. I can see why would it turns out unique, and then all I need to work on right now is the story itself as well as my craft. the voice, the idea itself, it's already there. Speaking of the story that I'm working on right now, another thing I find myself scared, very fearful of, is that I'm writing the story in a way that I don't feel I've seen anything like that on the market. I just don't know if I can find anybody that I can relate to. Again, I'm not supposed to thinking about who is going to be my audience, but learn to trust my voice, trust myself. And then the only thing I should worry about is to improve my craft and then put down this story to make it come true, as what Mira and Nair like to say. She said, I always like to remind young storytellers to trust themselves in terms of their stories. Not to think, I've got to make a film like that one, or I can't make this film because I haven't seen it before. But to precisely do that. Make the story because you haven't seen it, because it's your story, because it's something interests you, and that you will immerse yourself into it to be able to bring to us all facets of it. Not to be imitative, not to be just one of the pack, because why bother? I hope you find some of the tips and the things we discussed today is helpful. So there are some questions I want to share with you that you can start journaling about to really look deeper into it to find your unique voice. Where did you born and where did you grow up? What kind of people you grew up with? What kind of family they have? Personality they have? What kind of family do you have? What kind of things used to bother you or make you sorrow when you were a kid? Or what kind of things that gives you joy and makes you happy? Who has impact on your life the most? What they are like? Why did they impact on you? And what's your biggest fear? What kind of emotion experience that you are having a hard time to figure out yourself? Can you tap into that? And also, what's your value? What do you believe in? What kind of thing means the most to you? I think those are the things we should learn to discover even we're not a storyteller, because we do want to live a life, have more and more awareness of who we are and what our life experience is. So yeah, I think you can have fun with those journaling and maybe having some good cry during the journaling process like I did. Alright, thank you so much for chatting with me today, and I hope this video is helpful and I'm not rumbling too much and then what I said makes sense. And if you are still working on your chores and you want to watch more of this kind of coffee chat, I have a whole playlist right here for you. Hi Booger, and thank you so much for watching. Be patient, be present, stay creative. I'll see you next week. Bye. Beep.